It's really sad to see it so neglected and so silent, this farm. This was one of the 5 farms that the Steenkamp family owned. The Steenkamp family go back 3 generations in this land. Dion and his wife Christelle were well-respected members of community. They were very involved in church, in farming activities, and they had a social life here. What happened here was the most disturbing event that I have ever covered as a journalist. Really disturbing. And at the center of this was this boy. He's the only one who knows what really happened here. And he has the answers that we are all still looking for.
The Northern Cape is South Africa's largest province, yet it has the smallest population. Its vast stretches of arid land is home mostly to conservative, tough, Afrikaans-speaking farming communities. For local journalists like Steenkamp, news often consists of agricultural issues, community projects, feel-good stories. While crime is a big issue in the rest of the country, here it seldom reaches the front pages.
Small town crime like alcohol abuse and related crimes. But not many murders or farm murders, because farm murders is a big issue in South Africa.
Over the past 2 decades, rural South Africa has been plagued by a disturbing trend: farm attacks. Often far from their neighbours, farmers are seen as soft targets. Attacks are often violent, sometimes even coupled with torture. Attackers normally look for firearms, household goods, vehicles and money. In many cases, victims are cold-bloodedly murdered.
So when a farm murder happens, it's quite big news in this province because it's very seldom that happens.
Which is why on Easter Monday morning 2012, Shanae was shocked to find an unusual police report in her inbox. The report came from Griquastad, a small rural hamlet in the center of the province. It stated that the previous day, a pickup truck had stopped in front of the town's police station. A young boy got out. He was covered in blood. "They're all dead," he told the stunned policeman on duty. The boy was 15-year-old Don Steenkamp, son of a prominent farming family in the district. He reported that his entire family had been killed by unknown attackers. His father Dion, his mother Christelle, and his 14-year-old sister Martella. Don told police that he had been busy in the shed a few meters from the house. He then heard gunshots. His first impulse was to hide. When everything was quiet for a few minutes, he ran to the house.
Video operator, Constable Mohili, parcel number 7028060.
Police reach the farmhouse within minutes after the boy reports the attack. What they find shocks even the most hardened policeman.
Daar was baie bloed. Omdat hulle almal 'n kopwonde gehad het, was dit nie baie mooi toneel nie. Ek dink nie die publiek besef aldag wat so toneel behels om dit te aanskou. En selfs gesoute polismanne het die aand 'n traan gestort. Wat hulle vir my gesê het, man, ek doen die werk al 25 jaar, maar hierdie wreedheid het ek nog nooit beleef.
The small farming community is devastated. The Steenkamp family had been well known and well loved.
The loss to the community is indescribable. We lost not only friends, colleagues in the church, but we also lost pillars of the community. And for us to go on without them it's unthinkable.
Ons harte is ontseer. Ons harte is bedruk. Ons staan verslae as ons dink daaraan van so gesin net weet klein donker gebly.
But amidst the tears and sadness, uncomfortable questions are surfacing. Questions that are mostly whispered in hushed tones and behind closed doors. Joe Skoltz is grappling with things that don't make sense to him. He's in charge of rural safety in the local farming union and has studied countless farm attacks. Something was wrong with this crime scene.
As jy by 'n huis kom, gewoonlik waar 'n plaasmoord plaasgevind het, sou hulle iewers ingebreek het, wat nie die geval daar was nie. Daar was verskeie selfone wat in die huis rondgelê het. Hulle was nie gesteel nie. Die vrou se handsak het op die kombuiskas gestaan. Langer die handsak het die man se beursie gestaan met al sy bankkaarte. Ek verneem agterna, daar was R4000 kontant in. Dis nie gesteel nie. Die klerekaste is nie oopgemaak. Die klere is nie uitgegooi nie. Daar is nie gekrap nie. Die geweerkluis is wel oop. Die sleutel was in die deur. Binne in die geweerkluis was stom wapens, baie ammunisie, niks is weg nie. Die voertuie het in die waanhuis gestaan, nie een is gesteel nie. Tot op hede weet ek nie van enige iets wat deur die familie aangemeld is as vermis uit die huis uit, en dis baie vreemd. Ons kry nie spore van mense wat daar gekom het en weggevlug het nie. Ja, ons het gewonder altyd hoe die seun niks oorgekom het. gewoonlik maak hulle almal dood. Of as iemand weghardloop dan skiet hulle hom of hulle doen iets. Of hulle vermink hom net. Maar as ek sê hierdie was nou regtig baie snaaks dat 3 wreedaardig vermoor is en een kom niks oor nie.
They were a very close-knit family. My brother and his wife, Christelle, did everything for their children. And the children loved coming home. They loved being at home on the farm on the way. And my brother. Martella was my brother's favorite, and Don was Christelle's favorite, and you could see that. So I always thought they were very balanced. Each one has a favorite. But I never saw anything that the other parent was ugly or malicious or more strict to the one child than the other. I never picked up any signs of jealousy between Don and Martella. My cousin's husband phoned me and told me there was a farm murder on Nohoek. I couldn't believe that we became the victims of a farm murder. And the next thing, my husband and my son were around me, and they were holding me up. They were putting their arms around me, and they were holding me up and telling me everything will be okay. But at that stage, I realized life as I know it has come to an end for me.
A high-priority police investigation is underway. A full-scale search was launched the night of the attack. Neighbouring farmers were mobilised and a police helicopter deployed. So far, no sign of the attackers has been found. Heading the investigation is Colonel Dick de Waal, provincial head of the Hawks, South Africa's elite crime-fighting police unit. He has the following evidence recovered from the scene. 3 bodies, shot first with a .357 Magnum revolver, then executed with a .22 rifle. 2 of the family's weapons that match these calibers, which the boy, the only survivor, says he found near the farm gate. They later confirmed as the murder weapons. Various blood splatters and bullet holes in the house and on the yard. A torn, bloodied T-shirt found in the boy's bedroom. They only have one eyewitness, the boy. Compassionate policemen at the station had allowed Don to wash the blood from his hands, arms and legs after he reported the crime. It was his sister's blood, he had told them. She had died in his arms. Later, DNA evidence is collected from his clothes and body. Fresh scratch marks visible on his throat are photographed and referred to a doctor. One of the first things investigating officer Dick de Waal does in the days after the incident is to compile a timeline of the boy's version of events. With his GPS handy, he times himself as he goes through all the boy's actions. Don says he left the house and went into the shed before 18:30. It was before the end of a popular TV soapie that his dad and sister had been watching. His mother had been working at her computer. He then heard shots emanating from the house. He was scared and hid in the shed for about 10 minutes. When things were quiet, he ran into the house. Here he found the bodies of his father, mother and sister. According to the boy, his sister was still alive. He knelt beside her. She grabbed his t-shirt, tearing it and scratching him in the process. She said that she loved him and died in his arms. The boy says he was repulsed by her blood that had smeared off on him. He pushed her away and went into his room to change shirts. He then ran to the shed. Then he heard a second series of gunshots. Again, he waited for a few minutes. When things were quiet, he got into his father's truck and drove to the police station. At the gate, he noticed the two weapons lying in the grass. He picked them up. Further down the road, he stopped at the farm workers' huts. He shouted at them to take cover, as there were attackers on the farm. He then drove the 8-kilometer dirt road to the Griquastad police station, where he reported that his whole family had been killed. A telephone call is immediately made by the policemen on duty to their superiors. The time is registered as 18:50. What the boy didn't know was that his mother had sent a cell phone message to her sister at 18:34. An innocuous message about holiday plans, but a crucial piece of evidence. It means the murders must have taken place after 1834. This gives Don only 16 minutes to do all the things he said he did. According to the investigating officer's calculations, it simply wasn't possible in such a short time span.
It was an awkward situation to be in, to suspect him at the same time, and yet you have to try and console him. That's probably the most difficult thing, was then and still is. I almost see him as if two different persons, the Don before the 6th of April and Don after the 6th of April. But you know, there's always the doubt and the hope that you are wrong.
On 21 August, more than 4 months after the murders, Don Steenkamp is arrested. He's charged with the murders of his father Dion, his mother Christelle, and his sister Martella, plus defeating the ends of justice by pretending that it was a farm attack.
I'm satisfied with what the police did. I was really impressed by the lengths at which they went to solve all aspects of the case, and they investigated every little thing. We had close contact with the investigating officer, and he told us about all the leads that he followed up, and that he himself has a 15-year-old son, and he didn't want another 15-year-old son to be guilty of this. It was just totally unheard of for him.
You know, yeah, we haven't had any information from you for the past 2 weeks, and we really need something to put in the paper.
Up to the arrest, journalists like Steenkamp were having a frustrating time trying to get to the bottom of the story.
Yeah, no, I can't say who my sources are, but so you can't tell me anything at the moment, okay? So what you... Normally it's not like that, the police are more open, but in this case they were not, because it's such a high priority crime and the whole of South Africa were talking about it. So they had to, you know, put every step had to be correct.
Don Steenkamp's first court appearance is eagerly awaited. Griquastad and South Africa want answers. During the bail hearing, Colonel Dick de Waal lifts the veil slightly on the evidence the state has against Don. From the pathology report, it emerges that Dion Steenkamp and his daughter were not only shot, but also received several blows to the head with a blunt object, presumably the butt of a weapon. The young Martella also had injuries to her hands and arms, indicating that she desperately tried to fight off her attacker.
It was shocking to hear what really happened. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was that bad and that heinous. And obviously, it's assault and death. It sounded like there was emotions involved in this crime.
Another piece of evidence that emerges is a seemingly damning text exchange between Don and a friend just after the murders. How could the boy have known that no foreign fingerprints or DNA would be recovered on the scene? De Waal asks. The judge decides to grant bail, citing the accused's youth and the fact that he wants to continue his schooling as soon as possible. But there are problems at his school. Some parents don't like the fact that their children are in the company of a triple murder suspect.
I think they were just worried that if something like that could have happened, in whatever way, that it could also happen here. But I must be honest, I never got the impression that it could happen here. So what we did, what we thought was the right thing for the society of the school.
In the end, Don is not admitted back to school. An additional charge has been added to the charge sheet. That of rape. Experts have been consulted. They are of the opinion that an injury on Martella's genitalia is consistent with sexual penetration against her will. The defense vehemently denies this, saying it could have been self-inflicted or caused by bareback horse riding.
The implication was they added a motive for the murders because nobody knew why this happened. So that gave people a motive. If there was a rape, then he had a motive to kill everybody because there's no witnesses. So that made more sense, but we didn't know how they're going to prove the rape and when the rape would have happened and obviously why. We still don't know why the rape happened. Maybe the rape was there and it led to the murders, but why rape in the first place? That's still, I think, a question that we all grapple with.
For one day, court proceedings move to the murder farm.
Is dit die voordeur of die kombuis? Hier is die kombuis. Hier is die kombuis.
Legal teams get a chance to point out physical features to the judge.
Dis die agterdeur. Heeltemal sigbaar vanuit hierdie posisie. Asook hierdie boom.
Careful measurements are made around the spot under a tree where a pool of the young Martella's blood was found.
4.7.
128, Exhibit B.
The state calls several witnesses, ranging from pathologists, forensic experts, to townsfolk and farm workers. A forensic analyst explains that not only blood smears, but also splatters with specific patterns were found on Don's torn t-shirt. These couldn't have been caused only by his dying sister leaning against him. It is deduced that he must have been close to her when the shots or blows were delivered. Based on evidence they've gathered, the prosecution is of the opinion that events unfolded as follows. Christelle is shot first. The bullets enter her from behind, leaving her paralyzed. She never has a chance to see her attacker. Martella is probably second. She's shot in the chest, but manages to flee out the back door. Dion is third. The position of shots indicates that he was probably charging his attacker before being paralyzed by 2 shots from the revolver. The attacker then follows the young girl outside where he finds her under a tree. He shoots her in the face, then assaults her with a blunt object. A pool of blood on the grass tells of heavy bleeding. While her attacker goes back to fetch his second weapon, the severely injured girl stumbles back into the house. A row of blood splatters near the back door records her entry. More blood marks show that she paused at her father's lifeless body. A blood smear at the telephone indicates that she then probably tried to phone for help before collapsing. Her attacker then returns with a rifle, delivering a final fatal shot to the heads of all 3 victims. The defence's turn comes to deliver evidence. They call the boy to the stand.
We were sitting behind him, watching every move, every movement, if there was emotions, but we didn't find anything. He was strong.
He denies raping his sister and killing her and his parents. He sticks to his version that they had been killed by an attacker whom he never got the chance to see.
And he was so confident and so almost arrogant, as the judge also said it, and he just said he doesn't know, he doesn't remember, he cannot explain it. He stood his ground, he didn't waver, no emotions, nothing.
The trial concludes. The boy stays in custody, his guardian and a large family contingent showing their support. They're confident that the state doesn't have conclusive proof, simply snippets of circumstantial evidence.
In South Africa, most scientific evidence is circumstantial evidence that proves maybe that is, for example, the fingerprints of the accused, but it doesn't place him necessarily on the scene with criminal intent. So circumstantial evidence might seem for the public out there as inferior evidence, which it is not. The difficulty lies in, is this the only reasonable inference a court can draw that he's guilty based on that evidence?
Judgment Day arrives. Judge President Frans Gomo points to some of the facts that, according to him, militate strongly against a stranger intruder having committed the murders. The shooter must have arrived at the Steenkamp house unarmed and on foot. He was clearly familiar with the layout of the house. There was no sign of forced entry. He couldn't have slipped through the back door unnoticed while the family was inside the house. The only chance he could have to do this was while the family was outside earlier. Which means the intruder must have waited for 45 minutes inside the house before making his move, which is highly unlikely. Guns were left in the safe and not taken. The attacker left money and even the murder weapons behind, and for some reason spared the boy's life. If that was indeed the case, Khomo said, it must have been the dumbest farm attacker in South Africa. The judge discounts the boy's testimony that he was hiding in the barn, as there couldn't have been enough time for him to do this.
Placing himself in the barn is pivotal to the miner's defense. This is so because if this is not where he was during the murders, then he must have been in the house with his parents and sister when they were killed. If I have to be extremely charitable to the miner, I would have to find that he witnessed the shooter eliminate his family. A less charitable view would be that he was in cahoots with the shooter, or the least charitable scenario would be that he must have pulled the triggers of the smoking guns that he later that evening delivered to the police.
Khomo points out that the boy didn't go to his mom and dad to check whether they were still alive, didn't phone for help, and didn't arm himself against the alleged attacker. The tree where his sister was brutally assaulted was only 16 meters from the barn where he claims to have been hiding. Yet he says he didn't see or hear anything. He calls the boy an unreliable witness who changed aspects of his story a couple of times and whose testimony should be discounted. The judge accepts the evidence that young Matala had been raped between 12 and 24 hours before the incident. Evidence had been laid that no other people visited the farm during this period. The judge inferred that the person who raped her also perpetrated the murders.
In my view, the torturer wanted to achieve something, and that something, on the evidence, was to have sexual intercourse with the girl. The girl refused and defended her modesty. In consequence, she was tortured, raped, murdered to prevent her from reporting to her parents that she was raped, because the girl's parents would bear witness against the perpetrator. They too had to be eliminated, and were. This is the most plausible motive for murders, for the murders.
The judge finds Don Steenkamp guilty of the rape and murder of his sister, the murder of his father, and the murder of his mother.
Baie diep en in my hart ek nog, hy is onskuldig. Volgens ek nou die verklaring gehoor het, moet ek glo, hy is skuldig daaraan. Nou as hy skuldig is, dan moet hy gestraf word. Maar ek kry hom baie jammer, want hy's 'n dierbare kind, ek het hom baie lief. En hy sal altyd vir my die kind wees wat hy was.
In the sentence proceedings, a detailed psychiatric report is mentioned for the first time.
One of the big issues that was raised was he a psychopath? It is important to know that there was no clinical or historical evidence to support that diagnosis. When a child is even 3 years of age, you can actually start to see traits in that child that are different from other children, where they are described as being callous and unemotional. It's not to say that every callous and unemotional child is going to become a psychopath, but it is important that they do not have the same empathy as other people. What was very striking about the assessment of this young man is that that was not the case. There really was no suggestion in his earlier life that anything like this could have happened. I spent many, many hours with him. I had a very long assessment with him on more than one occasion. My experience of him was that he wasn't unemotional. I think he has been brought up in an environment in which showing emotion was not considered to be fitting of a man. And he was very at pains to be seen to be somebody who would have made his father proud.
Teachers in school said he was a quiet boy that never said anything in class, but after the murders he was very arrogant, very full of self-confidence. He enjoyed the attention that he got, especially from girls. He was a completely different boy.
One has to be very careful about imposing adult interpretations on adolescent emotions. That's one of the first things. Adolescents are notoriously uncommunicative at times, especially certain adolescents in response to adults. They can act and behave in ways that show distress in ways that are slightly different from adults, especially in adolescent boys. So sometimes adolescent boys may in fact get into trouble or behave badly, when in fact that is a marker of distress. It can be a marker of sadness, it can be a marker of depression, it can be a marker of something that, an underlying mental illness. So, when one has a young adolescent boy that gets into trouble, at school, for example, one mustn't make the instant assumption that that is a bad kid. That is actually often a child who is in distress and is suffering and has depression or some form of suffering which is acting out in that way. I think it's difficult to fully explain what happened at school. I think what one can say is that there was a change in him. Something was different. Some people have thought, he was just noticed because he was quite a very quiet and quite withdrawn person beforehand. And it's possible that he hadn't been really noticed. But after this, obviously there was a huge amount of attention that was put on him. And one doesn't know how that has affected him. Children that kill their parents and that kill their family often are mentally ill. The older the child, the more likely that is a mental illness. By far, the most cases in which a teenager of this age kills their family or their parents is in which that teenager is in fact the victim of something. Usually they are the victim of chronic abuse, and that there is chronic abuse in the family. That's not what I'm saying happened here. I'm just saying that that is the commonest pattern.
There were rumors amongst town folks that Dion was quite strict, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that suggests abuse. But I did find something in my archives, and I spoke to informed sources. It could be something, it could not be something. When Don was in grade 1 in the primary school in the little small town of Douglas, the hostel master was found guilty of abusing boys. Eventually, 11 boys came out and made affidavits. Don's parents were apparently not concerned that he was exposed to it because the victims were much older than he was. But what if he didn't say something? And also, one would never know what the abused boys said or did to the younger ones. It's really sad to see it so neglected and so silent, this farm.
What's clear is that he was not overtly mentally ill at the time of the assessments. He also denied being a victim of abuse. It's difficult because his entire family, who would be able to give testimony to what happened in that house on a regular basis, is not here. So the only person who could tell us won't.
The maximum sentence Don Steenkamp faces is 25 years imprisonment.
Sentencing is the last option when it comes to youth offenders. One always tries to steer away from the harsh reality of placing a child so young in direct imprisonment. And remember, most of the youth cases or the juvenile offender cases is dealt with through a diversion program, which is assessed from the beginning at a preliminary inquiry. So we're only dealing with the most heinous of crimes, the most serious of crimes, when we're thinking of the consequences of facing direct imprisonment.
I will allow a remission of 5 years as a window of hope through which you can peer through as you contemplate your future from your prison environment.
Don Steenkamp is effectively sentenced to 20 years in prison. The trial is over. But for family members, journalists, and the community of Griquastad, it has brought little comfort or closure.
En voor hy nie erkenning gemaak het en gesê het, mense, ek is jammer, ek het dit gedoen. Dan sal die mense hom dalk baie makliker vergewe.
Ek weet nie, dis een of ander. I think I will forgive him. It will not come soon, but my life will be a misery until the day that I find forgiveness. That's what I feel. But at the moment, because there's so many unanswered questions, it's difficult for me to forgive.
I think if he's mentally ill, I think that will reveal itself, and that will be an answer. And I think that over time that will become clear. I think if he has a personality disorder, I think that will also become clearer over time. I think if neither of those two things are the case, I don't think we will ever know. I think the story was truly buried on that day. If neither of those two things are at play, whatever happened on that day is locked in his head, and he hasn't said it yet, and I don't think he'll ever say it.
Moeilijk. Je brokjes. Ik denk niet dat het mogelijk dat mens hoe ook al goed je is, tot een mens schieten. Zo.
Nee, nee, ik heb ook straks schieten.
Ja, dat is jammer, die heeft in mijn paard opgestaan. Ons kan het die dag weer doen.
The Steenkamp family lived on a lovely farm in a quiet little town in a huge province with almost no crime. They had the same dreams and aspirations, same personality faults and wonderful things about them that we have. They were us. I mean, Afrikaans people in South Africa are supposed to be tight-knit family groups going to church. This mustn't happen. It cannot happen. So it makes you think it can happen. We still don't know the answers to this because he doesn't talk. That's also the big thing. We're trying to explain it away, but we can't, and that's why it's still this big thing in our lives. We just cannot explain it. There's no answers.